Hi everyone, I'm still your history teacher, and today we'll be talking about Egypt again. Yes, it's a good thing that during Corona times that we can go back in the past. We can go look at this beautiful culture, ancient Egypt, this wonderful society with pharaohs, with beautiful pyramids and so on. So come on, we'll go on a journey. We can't go to Egypt, but in our minds, with our fantasy, we can go back to this glorious civilization, glorieuze beschaving, right? Okay. Last lesson we talked about Egypt, about the Nile. Yeah? Remember, Egypt was a gift of the Nile. Yeah. This meant that without the Nile, Egypt wouldn't exist. It's very important. Egypt would be a desert, Augustine, right? Because the Nile is giving a few things. First of all, and this is very important, guys, because next week there's going to be a test, yeah? But remember, you can use your book for this test, yeah? So next week, no lesson, just a test, right? I've also seen that some people haven't gone to school yet to get their books, so make sure you do that, yeah? That's my dog barking in the back. My dog. Woof woof. Yeah. You might hear him a few times. Right, okay. So in the first unit, we saw that the Nile is very important. First of all, it brings some water on the fields, yeah, which is good. Remember, we call that irrigation, especially because the land is very dry. Yeah, there's not a lot of rain, regen. There's no rain in Egypt. In Egypt, it only rains 3 days a year. Can you imagine? Only 3 days a year, right? Also, there was a kind of fertilization messed, but that came on the fields. It was a black-brown material called silt, yeah, which you could find on the field. In Dutch, you call that slip. Slip. Right. Okay. So that's last week. This week, we're going to have a look at Egypt. What did it look like, Egypt? It lasted 3,000 years. And I wrote, duh. You can see here. Yeah? Duh. Can you imagine 3,000 years? Yeah? That's like crazy. We're going to see that in a minute. Why 3,000 years is very long. Yeah? It lasted 3,000 years, but there were some periods in it. Yeah? And we're going to have a look at those periods this lesson. This lesson is still an introduction, it's nog altijd een inleiding to the theme Egypt. But we're not going to look at the landscape today, we're going to look at Egypt itself. What did it mean to have a pharaoh? What was a pharaoh? He was in charge. In charge. He had the leiding. Yeah? So the pharaoh was in charge. Ancient Egypt. You see that we use the word ancient all the times. Oud. Heel oud. The ancients. Yeah? The oudheid. Right. 3,000 years of history. Is that a long time, 3,000 years? Yes. It's a very long time. It's 15 times Belgium. Can you imagine? Yeah. So Belgium's been around since 1830, I think. So it's 15 times Belgium. It's 12 times America. Yeah. It's 3 times as long as the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages. So it's huge. It's almost impossible that Egypt has been around for such a long time. Yeah? It's the only civilization that's been around for such a long time. No other country, no other people has had a culture that long, right? Okay, but in the beginning, so before there was an empire, a kingdom. An empire is een rijk, een koninkrijk, a kingdom. Actually, people just lived in villages. Huh? They were farmers. Remember, they weren't gathering food anymore. They had these little fields with grain. Yes, kleine veldjes met graan. Very close to the Nile, and they were just normal farms. farmers. Now, some of these villages, they became a little bit bigger. And you know how it goes. There's always one guy that needs a little bit more than the rest. Yeah? There's always one guy that's going to try to be the leader. Yeah? I'm so powerful. I have soldiers. Yes. What do you have over there? That's so beautiful. I want it. It's mine. Yeah? So what's happening from these villages, there's kings. Very small kings. They're not very powerful. But some of those kings will start conquering the other villages. Yeah? Dus ze beginnen de andere dorpjes te veroveren. So what you see is that you get these bigger entities, these bigger, you could call them countries actually, with some villages. Until at a certain point, you've got two Egypts. Yeah? You've got two kingdoms. There's a kingdom in the north, yeah, and there's a kingdom in the south. And you know the names, of course. The one in the south is called Upper Egypt, and the other one is Lower Egypt. Now, there was a king. They both had a crown. The white crown and the red crown. Now, at a certain point, there was a king, and he conquered the other kingdom. So this is very important. There was a very powerful king, and he conquered the other kingdom. And to show his power, this was his crown. Meaning, I am not only king of Lower Egypt, I'm also the king of Upper Egypt. You see? So that's the meaning of this crown. Because he's very powerful, he's got other crowns too. A crown, you know what a crown is? Een kroon, yeah? So here you can see what happens. Yeah? So this is Lower Egypt. Wait, I'll take another color. This is Lower Egypt. Yes, this is Upper Egypt. Combined, yeah, you've got this crown. When he goes to war, let's fight. When the pharaoh goes to war, he's wearing this crown. You can already imagine why, because it's very practical. If you wear this crown in the battle, they would probably pull it off your head. It would be dangerous. So this is a very practical hat. This is a very practical crown. Yeah. So you already hear me talking about this pharaoh. He's doing all kinds of things. He's conquering, he's fighting, he's all over the place. Yeah? What was the function of the pharaoh? What did he do? That's a very interesting question. Yeah? So how Egypt became one country from a lot of small parts. Probably Narmer. So that was the name of a pharaoh, and you can see him here. So this is Narmer. So you can see he's only wearing one type of crown. Was that the one of Lower Egypt? I think it was. And he conquered the other one, this one. And that's how he became pharaoh of both Egypts. You can see the other crown over here. You see? Yeah. So that's how he became the first real pharaoh of Egypt. And this, the two kingdoms combined in one, this is so important. Why? Because suddenly you get one person and he's the boss of 1 million people. Yeah? Do you see the difference? Food gatherers, there's only like 30 people in a tribe. You can't do anything with 30 people. What would you do with 30 people? Yeah? You can't build any temples or pyramids or whatever. If you've got 1 million people, wow. That's the crowd you can do something with. Yeah? You can order them to start building monuments. Yeah? And that's what happened in Egypt. Actually, for the very first time on this planet. Yeah? It's the first time that a real big civilization originated. You remember the word originate? Yeah? Ontstond. Okay, let's move on. So there will be 3 kingdoms. Let's have a look. This is a bit annoying with the camera going up and down. Yeah. There's the early times. So the times before Narmer, before the pharaoh that combined the 2 kingdoms. There's all these kings fighting amongst each other. There's no real big Egypt at that point. Yeah? So no big monuments being built and so on. Until Narmer, yeah, he's combining the crowns. He's putting them together, and one mighty Egypt arises. That's called the Old Kingdom. Yeah, this means that there's unity. Unity means eenheid. Yeah? And only with this unity, Egypt can be powerful. Only if they combine their forces, their strength, only then beautiful things can be built. And actually, this might sound a bit weird, but in the Old Kingdom, they started building pyramids right away. Yeah? So this is a time of these really, really huge monuments, these very impressive buildings they built. There's a capital, and a capital is een hoofdstad. And the capital in the Old Kingdom you can find over here is Memphis. Yeah? So as you can see, the capital is in Lower Egypt. This is Lower Egypt, remember? This is the Nile Delta. The delta. You can't read it because it's in yellow on green. Doesn't. Yeah, it's not very clear, but the Nile Delta, right? Okay. The Old Kingdom lasts for hundreds of years. Why? Because the Pharaoh is very powerful. Because there's these floods that are very important, and the floods, they continue to happen. Remember the floods, the overstromingen? Yeah? They're very, very important. Now the people believe that the Pharaoh is responsible for the floods. Yeah? So there's 1 million people, and they want to do everything for their king. Why? Because he's a god. They believe that he's a real god. So think of someone that you really, really, really like. Think of your idol. There must be someone. Yeah? What would you do for this person? Yeah? So the Egyptians, they've got this idol, and he's the Pharaoh. Because he's a god. They would do anything for him. Anything. They would build pyramids. They would go to war with him. No problem. Even if they're very poor. But at a certain point, towards the end of the kingdom, there's a problem. There's no more floods on the Nile. Yeah? And this is terrible. This is a disaster. We're at this point right now. Yeah? So no more floods means that there's famine. There's geen overstroming meer, hongersnood. Now, who's responsible? If there's no more floods and people start dying and there's no more food, that's horrible. Who's responsible? Of course. He's very powerful and he's very rich, but he is responsible. So what happens? Well, I think someone must have killed the Pharaoh, or people weren't happy with the Pharaoh anymore. There's no powerful pharaohs anymore. Yeah? So they lose their power. Probably the power will go back to these little kings, all over the country that still existed. Yeah. So there's like, and we call this an intermediate period. It's a difficult word. Intermediate betekent tussen de twee. Period. Right? But after a while, the floods come back, and there's a king, and he says, hey, what are you doing? I want this. I want your village. I'm going to conquer yours. And what happens? There's one Egypt again. We call this the Middle Kingdom. Yeah? With Middenrijk, which is quite logical, of course. At the end of the Middle Kingdom, there's problems again. Why? This time it's not because of the floods. The problem is that Egypt is so rich. It's so wealthy. There's so much gold and jewels that people from outside of Egypt, actually we call them the Hyksos, they want all the gold of the Egyptians. You understand? And they're coming for it. They're coming to get it. Yeah? And they have a very special thing. They have a chariot on wheels. They have a weapon like this. And the Egyptians had really big problems fighting those, the Hyksos. So that's the end of the Middle Kingdom. We're not going to say too much about the Middle Kingdom. It's not very interesting. We've got the Old Kingdom with the pyramids. And then the other very interesting period is the New Kingdom. Yeah? And the New Kingdom, of course, which pharaoh lives in the New Kingdom? You all know him. The capital here is Thebes. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to read, but it's Thebes. So Memphis is the capital of the Old Kingdom. Thebes is the capital. And as you see, it's no more in Lower Egypt, it's in Upper Egypt. Yeah, so that's a big change. Yes. So who lived in the Old Kingdom? In the New Kingdom, of course, Tutankhamun. Right. and this is his grave. Pharaohs are no longer buried in pyramids, so they stopped building the pyramids. They didn't do that anymore. This time they would bury them in tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Very well hidden. Nobody could find them. Yes. Why? Because of robbers, of course. Robbers were rovers. Yeah. So they had to be a little bit more clever. So if you think that this period is not as interesting as the Old Kingdom because it doesn't have pyramids, you're wrong. Why? Because they're not building pyramids anymore, but they're starting to build temples. I mean, temples all over the place. Yeah? Like there was this king Ramses II. He was so powerful. He built a lot of temples. Yeah. You know Abu Simbel, the most famous temple was built by him. Right. So you can go back to the book. This is what we've seen. So there's 3 kingdoms. There's intermediate periods. The pharaoh had godly power. He had a well-organized central administration. Hij had een goed georganiseerde centrale administratie. Met boekhouders en zo. En rechters en generaals. He had a very strong army. Yeah? The pharaoh tried to keep the empire together. But the unity, the eenheid, didn't always last. Sometimes Egypt lost its unity. That's why we're speaking of 3 kingdoms or realms, and 3 intermediate periods. Okay? The Old Kingdom, the capital was Memphis, and this is the period of the pyramids. Yes? Djoser, we'll see him later on because he built a certain kind of pyramid. And Cheops, you might know because of the big pyramids. Yes, the Middle Kingdom was ended and destroyed by the Hyksos. You don't have to know that name. They had horse and chariot, paard en strijdkar, which was like the tank of the ancient times. So people had really big problems fighting those. Right. And then you've got the New Kingdom. The capital is Thebes. Yes. This is like the time of Ramses II, Tutankhamun also. Yeah. There's something special about the New Kingdom because Egypt was so powerful that this time the pharaohs themselves started to conquer. Yeah, so the pharaohs, they would no longer just stay in Egypt. They went outside Egypt to get more territory, right? This is only in the New Kingdom. This is something they do in the New Kingdom. Yes? Okay. Hall of Fame of the New Empire. Yes. This is Ramses II. Is it the first? I think it should be the second. This is missing. Yeah, you know, Tutankhamun, of course. Akhenaten was very powerful. Hatshepsut, bless you, bless you. He had a temple. It sounds like you're sneezing. Hatshepsut! Moses III. These are not very important. If you remember these, I'm a very happy person. Yes. Okay. Why was the pharaoh so powerful? He was a king and a living god. Imagine, a living god. Wow. I want to be a living god. I want to have the power of the pharaoh. Can you recognize the pharaoh in this picture? Can you see him? If you paid attention really well this lesson, you'll recognize him. Because he's wearing the easy crown. Yes, he's wearing the crown to go to battle. Yeah, that's the pharaoh. This must be the Hyksos, I think. Yeah, the other chariot. The guy's over here. Yes. Okay, of course he couldn't do it alone. There was so much work to be done, and because he was a god, people believed the pharaoh was perfect. Yeah? So in the heads of the people, they saw this really beautiful person, yeah, with a beautiful body, girls. Woo! Yeah, he was very sharp and well. He went to the gym. People thought he went to the gym. No, he didn't go to the gym, of course, but they knew he had a beautiful body. He must have had a beautiful body because he was a god, which of course was not the case. Yeah, because he was a normal person. But the people couldn't know he wasn't a normal person. So mostly he stayed in the palace. Yeah, you understand? So he didn't go outside the palace at Palace. Because people would then see what's so special about this pharaoh. Yeah? So he had a person to do his work for him, and we call that one a vizier. Vizier, the vizier. Yeah. This is a vizier. Wait. Yeah. So it's a person looking out for him. He's going to the temples and he's checking: is this temple being built? Yeah. He had two actually. He had one in Lower and he had one in Upper Egypt. You can compare this to Prime Minister, Eerste Minister. Yeah? So this was the highest person in Egypt after the Pharaoh, the Vizier. He had a lot of officials, ambtenaren. Yeah? There were a lot of taxes that had to be paid. There was no money in those days. Taxes, belastingen. Yeah? There was no money, so they paid in grain. You understand? Yeah? Ze betaalden in graan. So the Pharaoh would have all this grain. He would be really powerful. He also had a very strong army. And he was the leader of the army. Yes? So you have to realize the Pharaoh, he was the first general. When there was a war, he would fight. Like, really fight. Can you imagine? Do you see President Trump fighting in a war? I don't see it happening. Yeah? Also, he was a very important priest in the temple. Yeah? The Pharaoh, he could vote any law he wanted. Yeah? Een wet stemmen. Yeah? So he could do that. He was the Pharaoh. He could change the law if he wanted, of course. And he was the first judge in the country. Judge is a rechter. Yeah? So when there was a crime, when one general murders another general, een moordaanslag aan het hof bijvoorbeeld, he had to judge those. You are guilty. I'm going to punish you till death. Okay. Okay. This is almost the end of the lesson. So, Egyptians called their king pharaohs. Yes. So a pharaoh is actually a typical name in Egypt. You can't find it in any other country. Yeah? They believed he was the son of the god. Actually, the son of the god Ra, who was the sun god. Yeah. He had been given power, so he had power from the gods. He was both god and king. He served the gods and ruled the people. Dus hij diende de goden en overheerste de mensen. Right? First of all, he's a religious leader. He's a political leader, so this means that he can make laws if he wants. Yeah? He makes all the important decisions. Decision is een beslissing. Yeah? So actually the Pharaoh's got all the power combined in one person. So that's why he was so powerful. Army, administration, justice is justitie. That's als rechter. And the food supply was very important. De voedselvoorziening. So to avoid disorder, om chaos te vermijden, he had to rule with a firm hand. I'm the Pharaoh, you'll have to do what I tell you, otherwise, bam, I'll crush you. He was the guardian of the mats. Yeah, remember the mat? We saw that last time. The mat is the cosmic order. Everything in Egypt is very closely combined. You've got the desert. Let's keep the desert where he is. Then we've got the oasis. The oasis, the oase, right? We've got the floods every year. There has to be a flood. Otherwise, the desert will destroy the oasis and everything will die. So the Pharaoh is responsible for this. He has to make sure that there's these floods going on. Yeah? He was also helped by an army of priests, civil servants, soldiers. Soldiers, soldaten, priests, priesters. Civil servants, ambtenaren. Right? Of course, because he wants people to love him, he wants to display his power. Hij wil zijn macht tonen. He used to do this by using propaganda. Yeah? And in this propaganda, he would build a temple, for example. Look at this temple I built as a pharaoh. Of course, it's the people that would build it, but it was his temple. He would make statues of himself. Standbeelden. So what's propaganda? Het is een soort reclame. Yeah? It's like a poster of yourself. People would make a poster nowadays. Vote for. That's propaganda. But in those days, they wouldn't have posters, of course. They built a temple or they made a statue. Right? Okay. The rest is history, of course. Yeah? So 3,000 years of Egypt, and afterwards, yeah, everything disappears. This is Abu Simbel, by the way. This is a temple of Ramses II. Why does Egypt disappear? Because the pharaohs no longer exist, and because there's foreign invaders. Foreign invaders, vreemde veroveraars. The first of all of these foreign invaders, this is, by the way, you don't have to know this. This is just extra. This is because it's very interesting. The first of all was Alexander the Great. Yeah? Actually, before Alexander, there were the Persians. The Persians would come to Egypt, and they also had a godly king. They also had a king that was a god. So what they said, oh, we're sorry, Pharaoh, ooh, you can't do that. That's no good. So no more Pharaoh. So the Persians conquered Egypt, and they said, let's get rid of this Pharaoh. And the Egyptians, they were so sad because everything in their life was about the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was a very important person in Egypt. And then Alexander came and he kicked out the Persians. And the first thing he did was, he said, you can have a Pharaoh again. It's okay for me. You can have a Pharaoh. I even have a very good candidate. Ik heb een heel goed kandidaat. Namely, myself. So Alexander the Great became Pharaoh of Egypt. And actually he was the first Greek Pharaoh. De eerste Griekse Pharaoh. And then there were all these Greek pharaohs in Egypt. And actually, you know the last Greek pharaoh. You know his name. The last Griekse pharaoh ken je. Yeah? Actually, it was a girl. Yes, I can hear you say it. I can hear you think it. Come on. Yes. Shout it to the scream. Cleopatra. Yeah. Cleopatra. Cleopatra. Like that. Yeah. Okay. Then we've got the Romans. Julius Caesar. He was in love with Cleopatra. They had an affair. Wow. After that, it was conquered by Muslims. The Muslims. And that's why if you go to Egypt nowadays, you will see a lot of Muslims over there. They were kicked out by Napoleon. And you already know that Napoleon was very important. Because he took scientists to Egypt. This is, by the way, around 1800s. Yeah, and after this, it was British. Yeah, England. So Egypt was British until the First War, I think, First World War, and then it was a country on its own. Yeah, Egypt today is still a beautiful country. Yeah? Maybe you've been there. There's a lot of beautiful hotels, but there's some problems. But I'm going to talk about that in class. It's a bit difficult using these slides. Okay, I see that we've got half an hour, so I hope you understood everything. If you have problems, you can do that in the lesevaluatie. Remember? Ik wil daar trouwens nog iets over zeggen over de lesevaluatie. Dus ook nu moeten jullie weer een lesevaluatie invullen. Dat is niet veel werk, hè. Maar jullie hadden de vorige keer problemen om de leerstof samen te vatten. Dus zoals de samenvatting van vorige les. Is eenvoudig, hè. Dat is de titel, hè. Egypte is zonder de Nijl is niets, hè. Dat was eigenlijk nu vandaag, moet ik er goed nadenken, hè. Wat dat het allerbelangrijkste was. Dus ik vraag niet zo'n aantal details, dat vraag ik eigenlijk niet. Ik vraag eigenlijk, wat is het allerbelangrijkste? Goed. En dan volgende week is de toets. Let wel, je kan die enkel maar maken op het moment dat normaal les is. Dus zorg dat je dan zeker achter je computer zit. Oké. Thanks for listening. That was it. See you in 2 weeks. Right? Okay, bye.